She walked into the luxury car dealership wearing a simple pair of jeans and a plain white t-shirt, gently inquiring about the limited edition Azure Coupe model. The sales manager, Blake Anderson, immediately scanned her outfit, a mocking smile briefly appearing on his face. "Sorry, but I think you've got the wrong place," he said dismissively, gesturing toward the used car section. "Our vehicles are reserved for customers of a certain class." Laughter echoed from nearby employees, and curious glances from other customers turned toward her. Jessica felt her face flush with embarrassment, a wave of humiliation rising within her, but she quietly turned away without saying a word. Blake could never have anticipated that. The very next morning, a lavish Rolls-Royce Phantom worth over $1 million would slowly pull up in front of the dealership. When the rear door opened, revealing a person he never expected, Blake's smug smile quickly vanished, replaced by shock and disbelief. He never saw this coming. The morning sun streamed through the transparent windows, casting a soft golden light over the luxury cars in the high-end showroom in Manhattan, New York. The space of exclusive motors felt like an art exhibition filled with pride, where every car on display exuded opulence and unmatched class. The glass door opened gently, and a young woman stepped in with an unassuming demeanor. It was Jessica Carter, a 35-year-old African-American woman. She wore a simple white t-shirt, faded blue jeans, and her smooth black hair was neatly tied up. Jessica quickly scanned the room, trying to locate the car she was looking for. Immediately, from the corner of the room, Blake Anderson, a well-dressed sales manager in his 40s, with a sharp gaze and dressed in an expensive suit, raised his eyebrows as he observed her. His eyes were cold, scrutinizing her from head to toe with an unmistakable air of disdain on his face. Blake crossed his arms and slowly walked toward her, visibly irritated. Before Jessica could speak, he took the initiative, his voice laced with sarcasm, loud enough for the entire store to hear. "I think you've come to the wrong store," Blake sneered, pointing toward the door, his tone clearly dripping with contempt. "Here, we only sell vehicles for the elite, with prices starting at least $300,000. I think you'd be better off looking somewhere else." Jessica froze. The blatant insult hit her like an invisible knife, making her heart tremble. A wave of discomfort spread from her chest. Other employees in the store began to take notice, some not even trying to hide their curious and mocking stares. Taking a deep breath, Jessica tried to remain calm, reminding herself of the reason she was there. It was a special gift for her sister Samantha, who had just defeated cancer after a long, challenging year. Jessica wanted her sister to receive this gift as a celebration of her strength and resilience. Ignoring Blake's attitude, Jessica smiled politely and responded gently, "Thank you for your concern, but I don't think I'm in the wrong place. I'm here to inquire about a special car, the limited edition Azure Coupe in midnight blue." Blake was momentarily stunned, then immediately burst into laughter, his tone growing more pointed, openly mocking her. "Azure Coupe? Limited edition?" Blake rolled his eyes and shook his head sarcastically. "I think you've been reading too many magazines. That car is only available to VIP customers with a pre-booking. I don't think you're on that list." At that moment, the entire store fell into complete silence. All eyes turned toward Jessica with curiosity mixed with skepticism. The tension in the air seemed to freeze the space around them. Jessica stood there, calm but with a heavy heart, her gaze fixed firmly on Blake, a mix of determination and sadness in her eyes. She had faced similar situations before, but never had the sadness and disappointment felt so great as it did now, in this luxurious setting, in front of all these strangers. She sighed quietly, preparing to face the next difficult conversation, unaware that this was just the beginning of a series of dramatic events that would shift many people's perspectives. especially that of the arrogant man standing before her, Blake Anderson. Jessica held her gaze steady as Blake took another step closer, deliberately raising his voice so that the entire store could hear him. His tone was cold and arrogant, meant to intentionally humiliate. "Miss, I think you've got the wrong address. All of the cars here are over $300,000. I believe a more affordable store would be more suitable for someone like you." Immediately, a few chuckles echoed from other employees. Eyes filled with both curiosity and malice turned toward Jessica, as if she were a joke on the grand stage of this luxurious world. Blake Anderson watched with satisfaction as his words took effect, his eyes shining with delight at Jessica's discomfort. Jessica felt her face burn with heat, a wave of shame rising from her chest, but she fought hard to keep it in check. Every breath, every beat of her heart seemed to remind her of the countless times she had overcome similar insults, from condescending looks to cruel words. But this time, standing in the vast, luxurious space of New York's finest showroom, her heart felt suffocated. From the corner of the room, a young salesman named Daniel Harris silently watched. He had only been working there for a few months and had always felt uncomfortable with the way Blake frequently judged customers based on their appearance and skin color. Daniel's gaze moved uncertainly between Blake and Jessica, as if he wanted to say something but remained silent, helpless. Blake glanced at Daniel, his expression contorting with irritation at Daniel's disapproving look. He moved closer to Jessica, lowering his voice deliberately, but still loud enough for everyone to hear, dripping with scorn. "Listen to me. Don't waste my time any longer. These cars aren't for people who are just here to dream. You can leave right now, we won't mind." Jessica stared straight into Blake's eyes. She saw not only prejudice there, but also an obsession with superiority, status, and power. He was a man who believed a person's worth was determined by money and appearances. A man who spent his life trying to prove himself through expensive items and by dominating others. Jessica took a deep breath, her voice calm, clear, and composed. "Mr. Anderson, I'm only here because I'm genuinely interested in that car. I hope you will think carefully about the way you've treated me." Blake let out a cold laugh, crossing his arms in front of his chest, entirely unconcerned by Jessica's mild warning. "I think I've made myself perfectly clear. Know your place and leave now, before I call security." The store fell silent. An invisible tension spread through every corner. The employees stopped laughing, their gazes shifting from mockery to unease, as they began to sense that something serious was happening. Jessica felt her hand shake slightly, but she kept her face strong, filled with resolve and dignity. She turned around and slowly walked toward the door. But just as the glass door was about to close behind her, Jessica paused for a moment, scanning the luxurious showroom once more, quietly imprinting every detail of this painful yet meaningful moment into her mind. She knew that today's insult would be the beginning of something greater, something more profound, and Blake Anderson, the prejudiced man, would soon realize the grave mistake he had made. Then, Jessica gently stepped outside, the glass door closing behind her. A chilling silence enveloped the space, as if foretelling the storm that was about to come. As the glass door slowly closed behind Jessica, she walked slowly toward the sunlit sidewalk. From behind the transparent glass of the store, the eyes of the onlookers still lingered, filled with various emotions: surprise, curiosity, even a sense of satisfaction mixed with regret. But none of them knew that the seemingly simple woman who had just walked out the door held an extraordinary life story, one far beyond anything they could imagine. Jessica Carter was not an ordinary woman, nor was she someone who merely dreamt of unattainable things, as Blake had assumed. In fact, she was the founder and heart of the renowned Carter Foundation, a humanitarian organization that had transformed the lives of thousands of disabled children in New York and many cities across the United States. 10 years ago, Jessica had been a talented lawyer working for a prestigious firm in Manhattan. However, after a chance volunteering experience at a children's hospital, her life took a completely different direction. She left behind a promising career and founded the Carter Foundation, dedicating her heart and personal resources to giving hope to those less fortunate. The Carter Foundation quickly grew thanks to Jessica's dedication, professionalism, and personal integrity. The foundation's projects included building special schools, providing modern medical equipment, offering psychological support, and training disabled children to become self-sufficient. Jessica Carter's name became widely known in charitable circles, though she always tried to stay out of the limelight, living humbly and simply. Yet, what even fewer people knew was that Jessica had another special identity. She was the wife of Nathaniel Carter, a famous African-American tech billionaire known across the United States, the owner of Carter Tech Group, a leading technology company with inventions that change the way people communicate, live, and work. At 42, Nathaniel Carter was regarded as one of the greatest business leaders of his generation. However, what truly made him stand out was his humble personality and surprising simplicity. Despite owning numerous estates, private jets, and a fortune worth billions of dollars, Nathaniel lived quietly, far from the flashy and noisy lifestyle often associated with billionaires. For him, the true value of life wasn't wealth or fame, but the ability to create positive change in society. Jessica and Nathaniel had met over 10 years ago at a conference on technology and social development in Washington. The two quickly realized they shared a common vision: to use the resources they were fortunate to have to help the vulnerable. Their love and bond were built on compassion, empathy, and a shared vision of a better future for the community. Today, Jessica had come to Exclusive Motors, not just to buy an expensive gift for her sister, but also to celebrate Samantha's courageous victory over a deadly illness. For Jessica, this gift was not just a material item, but a symbol of hope, perseverance, and faith in the goodness of life. However, all of this had been trampled by Blake Anderson simply because of her humble appearance and the color of her skin. As Jessica walked away from the store, her heart still heavy, she felt a deep sense of determination growing within her. She knew that this incident could not be left unresolved. It would become a major opportunity for her and Nathaniel to show everyone that a person's true value had never and would never be determined by their appearance or skin color. Behind the glass door, Blake Anderson remained oblivious to the fact that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, a mistake that would change everything. As Jessica walked down the bustling street outside, inside Exclusive Motors, Blake Anderson was still basking in the self-satisfied feeling of his perceived victory. He crossed his arms, leaned back against a shiny silver Bentley, his cold gaze quickly scanning the expensive watch on his wrist, then turned to a few colleagues who were chuckling nearby. "I can't stand people like that," Blake sneered, shaking his head with clear disdain. "Who does she think she is? Does she really think that just because she wears a t-shirt and jeans, she can walk in here and be treated like she's on the same level as actual high-class customers?" Another young employee standing next to Blake, named Kyle, immediately chimed in, laughing along. "You're right, Blake. You can tell she couldn't even afford a single rearview mirror here." Blake smiled again, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction at the praise. He was the type of person who constantly sought recognition, eager to show off his power through polished appearances and sharp words aimed directly at others' self-worth. However, not everyone in the store agreed with Blake's behavior. Daniel Harris, the young employee who had witnessed the entire incident, remained silently standing near the reception area. Unlike his colleagues' enthusiasm, Daniel felt uneasy, a growing sense of discomfort rising within him. He understood that Blake had crossed a line by publicly insulting a customer simply based on her appearance and skin color. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and the glass door opened once again. A middle-aged couple walked into the store. Blake immediately recognized them as familiar regulars, the Harringtons, wealthy business owners who frequently purchased expensive cars here. Blake's face quickly shifted into a welcoming, eager expression, his gaze bright and entirely opposite to the cold, dismissive look he had just directed at Jessica. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, it's so great to see you both. I'm sure there's something special bringing you in today." Blake laughed loudly, rushing to greet them with an enthusiastic handshake. "Oh, Blake, we're here to check out the new Azure Coupe, the limited edition you told us about last time," Mr. Harrington responded cheerfully. "Absolutely," Blake eagerly nodded. "I can assure you both, this car was designed exclusively for high-class customers like yourselves. Please, follow me. It's been placed in our special display area." Blake immediately led them toward the far corner of the showroom, where the Azure Coupe, Midnight Blue Edition, was displayed on an elevated, luxurious pedestal. As they passed by where Daniel was standing, Blake subtly glanced at him, silently warning him not to interfere with his interaction, then continued guiding the Harringtons. While Blake was busy displaying his special enthusiasm for the wealthy couple, Jessica unexpectedly returned, gently stepping back into the store. Her appearance caused the entire showroom to freeze for a moment. Blake stopped, his eyes widening with surprise and irritation as he realized that Jessica was calmly making her way toward the Azure Coupe. Jessica stopped in front of the car and turned to Blake with a calm, clear, and polite voice. "Mr. Anderson, I'm sorry, but I'd really like to take a closer look at the Azure. Could you please take a moment to introduce this model to me?" Blake's expression immediately darkened, his eyes showing clear frustration and contempt. He quickly walked over to Jessica, lowering his voice but deliberately loud enough for everyone around to hear. "I'm sorry, but this Azure Coupe is reserved for VIP customers who've made a pre-booking. You don't fall into that category. I think you should take a look at the used cars over there." Blake coldly gestured toward the used car section, hidden behind a glass wall. Jessica remained composed and dignified. She looked Blake directly in the eye, trying to suppress the anger that was beginning to boil within her. "I don't think I need to make a reservation just to view a car that's on display right here, and I'm not sure why you keep emphasizing the used car section to me." Blake smirked, his face growing even colder. He wanted to end this quickly. "Ms. Carter," Blake's voice dripped with sarcasm, "we have clear policies. These cars are only for those who are truly serious about their financial capabilities. And I'm sorry to say this directly, but you're not on that list." His biting words echoed through the room like a knife, deeply cutting into Jessica's heart. Every gaze in the showroom, from employees to customers, turned toward her with curiosity and pity. Whispers began to rise, and the air in the showroom became thick with tension. Jessica felt the sting of the insult spreading throughout her chest. She had endured countless looks of discrimination and cruel words from people like Blake Anderson, but today, this public humiliation felt heavier than ever. As she stood there, she realized that this wasn't just her personal story anymore, but an overt display of prejudice that was being accepted by everyone present. Now, Jessica knew that no matter what, she could not let Blake Anderson and the people around him get away with their actions so easily. But she would not act impulsively or let negative emotions dictate her behavior. Jessica understood that a person's true worth could never be destroyed by a few hurtful words. Instead, she would prove to everyone that this wrongful judgment would have consequences, but not in the way Blake and the others might expect. Taking a deep breath to regain her composure, Jessica turned and walked out of the store, leaving behind a heavy atmosphere and eyes full of shock. In her mind, a plan for teaching Blake Anderson a profound lesson was beginning to take shape. As Jessica turned her back and walked away from the Azure coupe, the glass door of the showroom opened once again, accompanied by the soft chime of the bell. A middle-aged white couple stepped inside, immediately attracting Blake Anderson's attention. Without hesitation, Blake adjusted his expensive blue tie, quickly moving to greet them with a wide, welcoming smile. In stark contrast to the cold and dismissive attitude he had shown Jessica, his overly enthusiastic demeanor now stood out, highlighting his blatant discrimination. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, welcome back to Exclusive Motors." Blake bowed slightly, polite but laced with flattery. He spread his arms to guide the wealthy couple toward the very Azure coupe that Jessica had just inquired about moments before. "This Azure coupe is the limited edition I mentioned to you last time. A perfect choice, entirely fitting your level of sophistication." Jessica, a few meters away, stopped in her tracks and observed the scene with clarity. A wave of both pain and anger surged inside her. It wasn't because she wasn't being served properly, but because Blake's actions had crossed the line of ordinary personal disrespect. This was blatant racism, expressed openly and without restraint. Meanwhile, Blake continued to lavish attention on the Harringtons, his voice eager. "This car is a special import with a very limited supply. Only truly exceptional customers can own one. You two are absolutely deserving." Each word felt like a knife wound, each phrase deepening the hurt inside Jessica. She couldn't allow this injustice to go unchallenged. With a sense of resolve, she decided to approach once more. Her steps were slow but deliberate, enough for Blake to notice her coming toward him. As Jessica approached, Blake immediately furrowed his brow and glanced at her with a guarded, slightly irritated look. But Jessica maintained her calm demeanor, speaking with an impressive composure. "Excuse me, but you clearly told me earlier that this Azure was only for VIP customers who had pre-booked. So, do these customers have a reservation?" The atmosphere in the showroom froze instantly, all eyes turning to Blake and Jessica. The other employees and even the Harringtons seemed to sense the awkwardness of the situation. Blake paused for a moment, but he wasn't one to back down easily in front of regular clients. A flash of anger mixed with confusion passed through his eyes, quickly turning into a cold, defiant expression. Blake turned fully toward Jessica, this time speaking louder, deliberately enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. "Miss Carter, I think you should understand one thing. We don't sell cars to people who dress like you, especially not people like you." Blake's words rang out clearly in the vast, cold space like a bucket of ice water splashing directly in Jessica's face. The showroom fell silent, and all other sounds seemed to stop instantly. Some people in the showroom gasped in shock, while a few employees began to avert their gaze, embarrassed by Blake's egregious behavior. Jessica stood still for a second, her heart trembling from the deep hurt, but she remained composed, her unwavering gaze fixed on Blake. For a brief moment, Blake felt an odd sense of unease, but his arrogance quickly took over as he tilted his chin higher, trying to assert his power and position in this tense moment. In that brief moment, Daniel Harris, the young employee who had been watching the whole situation, clenched his fists in tension. He knew this was wrong, but felt powerless in the face of Blake's overwhelming authority and confidence. However, This time, the situation had crossed a line he could no longer tolerate. Jessica slowly nodded, her face not showing anger but a profound sadness mixed with clear disappointment. She lowered her voice, speaking softly but loud enough for Blake to hear clearly. "Mr. Anderson, today you have shown me the true face of both you and this place. I truly thank you for that." With that, Jessica turned and walked out of the store, this time for the last time. No one dared to say another word as the glass door closed behind her with a soft sound, almost as if trying not to further disturb her already hurt state. But in that moment, as she stepped outside, everyone felt a definite truth. This was not going to end so simply. Inside the showroom, Blake tried to regain his composure, continuing to serve the Harringtons as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, a strange feeling began to stir in him, a sense that he had just made a grave mistake, one that had the power to undo everything he had built. However, Blake quickly pushed that thought aside, continuing to feign cheerfulness. No one knew that in just a few minutes, Blake's serious mistake would unleash a storm, sweeping away all the lies he had always been proud of. And the one who would spark that storm, no one else but Jessica Carter, the woman he had just deeply insulted with cruel, openly racist words in front of everyone. As the glass door closed behind Jessica, an oppressive atmosphere quickly filled the entire Exclusive Motors showroom. Every person in the showroom instinctively turned their gaze toward Blake Anderson, their looks full of complexity. Some were shocked, some confused, and others filled with concern about the potential consequences of the tense confrontation that had just occurred. At that moment, a tall, middle-aged man emerged from the office at the back with a stern expression. It was Richard Mason, the owner of Exclusive Motors, who had always prided himself on managing one of the most luxurious and prestigious car dealerships in New York. Richard Mason had been observing the entire situation from behind the glass of his office, but he did not intervene immediately. He only stepped out once Jessica had left, seemingly to ensure that the situation did not escalate into something more troublesome. Richard's face grew serious as he approached Blake. He adjusted his expensive tie, asking in a low, authoritative voice that was clearly tinged with reproach, "Blake, what just happened here? I don't appreciate any commotion that could affect the store's image." Blake, still irritated from the incident, immediately began to explain defensively. "Mr. Mason, that woman clearly wasn't suited for our clientele. I tried to explain politely to her that this is not a place for people like her, but she insisted on causing trouble." Richard Mason paused for a moment, his cold eyes drifting toward the glass door where Jessica had just exited. He understood what Blake had implied, but instead of reminding his employee about proper conduct, Richard tacitly supported Blake's actions. "Blake, I trust you understand who our customers are. Exclusive Motors exists because we know how to select the right clientele. I hope this will be the last time I see something like this happen in my store." Richard Mason did not say another word, but his message was clear. He was fully backing Blake, silently endorsing the discriminatory actions that had just taken place. A few showroom employees lowered their heads, intentionally pretending not to hear anything. Only Daniel Harris, the youngest employee there, felt the palpable sense of injustice and unease spreading throughout the store. After Richard returned to his office, Blake immediately regained his confident demeanor, turning to the colleagues nearby with a triumphant air, as if Richard's unspoken approval had given him more power to continue acting as he pleased. Blake even whispered loud enough for Daniel to hear. "See, Daniel? This is why I'm the manager and you're just an employee. Remember this. The value of a customer depends on their wealth and status, not the ideals you like to dream about." Daniel clenched his fists, turning his face away. trying to suppress the anger and helplessness building within him. He had never felt this disappointed in his workplace before. Outside the showroom, Jessica walked slowly toward her car parked across the street. Now, she tried to keep her face calm, but the pain from the harsh insult and the disappointment from the public discrimination were still evident in her deeply sad eyes. Jessica had never imagined that, right in the heart of a civilized city like New York, a prestigious dealership like Exclusive Motors could harbor such blatant racism. She paused in front of her car, sighing softly as she tried to push the recent hurt away. But deep in her mind, a powerful determination was forming. It wasn't the determination for revenge, nor was it to harm anyone, but a resolve to use today's painful experience to create meaningful change, forcing people like Blake Anderson and Richard Mason to understand that the world could no longer accept such discriminatory actions. Jessica started her car and drove away from the showroom, but her heart had completely changed. Today's event wasn't a failure for her. It would become the beginning of a stronger, deeper struggle. A struggle for those who had been unjustly treated to regain their dignity and true worth. Back inside the showroom, Blake still stood proudly among his colleagues, showing no concern or regret for his actions. But what Blake didn't realize was that from the moment he chose to publicly insult Jessica Carter, an invisible flame had been ignited. A flame that would soon spread and burn away the false pride that he and his boss, Richard Mason, held. At this moment, Blake was still full of self-satisfaction, believing he had won, and that Jessica was just a weak figure pushed out of his elite world. What he didn't know was that Jessica Carter was, in fact, the person with the power to change everything forever. As Jessica's car slowly drove down the gravel driveway leading to the large estate on the outskirts of the city, the rows of lush trees on either side seemed to gently welcome her back after a day full of turbulence. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to leave behind the pain and disappointment she had just experienced, but her heart still felt heavy from the cruel words of Blake Anderson and the cold, subtle prejudice of Richard Mason. As she turned off the engine, Nathaniel Carter, the elegant man with a tall frame and deep, authoritative eyes, and the husband she loved most, was already waiting by the front door. He quickly walked toward her when he noticed the sorrow still lingering on Jessica's face. Nathaniel gently placed his arm around her shoulders, his eyes full of concern and tenderness. "What's going on, sweetheart? You look so exhausted." Jessica leaned her head softly against Nathaniel's shoulder, feeling the warmth and peace from him. For that brief moment, she truly felt safe again. The silence surrounding the mansion was almost uncanny, with the gentle sound of birds singing in the distance, as if trying to soothe the pain in her heart. "I just went through something really tough," Jessica said softly, her voice still tinged with deep sadness. "At the Exclusive Motors dealership, I was openly discriminated against because of my appearance and the color of my skin." Nathaniel's expression immediately darkened, and he tightened his hold on Jessica's shoulders, as if to protect her from any further harm. "Tell me exactly what happened there, Jessica. What exactly went down?" Jessica slowly sat down on the large sofa placed in the middle of their elegant yet cozy living room. The soft afternoon light filtered through the large windows, casting a warm glow on her face, highlighting the contemplative and resilient expression. Jessica recounted the events in clear, detailed terms, from Blake Anderson's public contempt to Richard Mason's disappointing silent approval of the discrimination. The more Nathaniel heard, the more his face grew serious. His usually calm eyes now burned with an intense, rare anger. For Nathaniel, a man who was always composed and rational, the offense against Jessica wasn't just a personal insult to her. It was a direct attack on the very values he had always stood for in his life. He stood up abruptly, his eyes sharp as a blade, pacing the living room with a tense energy. "I can't accept this, Jessica. Blake Anderson will pay dearly for those words and that immoral attitude. Exclusive Motors needs to understand that discrimination is unforgivable. I will handle this immediately." Jessica watched her husband, fully aware of the rage within him. But she also realized that, at this moment, revenge or simple punishment wasn't what she wanted most. Jessica gently stood, walked over to Nathaniel, and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Nathaniel, I understand your anger, but please hear me out. Punishing Blake Anderson or the dealership right now won't address the root of the problem. What I truly want isn't revenge, but real change in their mindset, to make them realize they were wrong and that they need to change that deep-seated discriminatory attitude." Nathaniel looked into Jessica's eyes, momentarily surprised but filled with admiration. He knew that the woman standing before him always had a deeper, more humanistic perspective than anyone else he'd ever known. Jessica never chose the easy way to solve a problem. She always looked further, deeper, seeking true, lasting values. "Do you really think people like Blake can change their mindset?" Nathaniel asked, his voice softening slightly. Jessica smiled faintly and nodded with certainty. "I believe they can. People aren't born with hatred or discrimination. They learn it from their environment and the biases around them. And if they can learn it, they can unlearn it and become better people. You and I have the resources to influence them, to help them realize that the true value of a person is never in their appearance or social status." Nathaniel looked at his wife with deep respect. It was her strength, determination, and compassion that always made him so proud of her. After a few minutes of deep thought, Nathaniel took her hand and spoke sincerely and decisively. "All right, Jessica, I understand your point. If what you want is to change their mindset, then I'll help you do that. We will use this event to send a strong message that the world can no longer tolerate any form of racism or discrimination." Jessica felt a profound sense of relief spread through her heart. In that moment, she knew she was not alone. Nathaniel would always stand by her, supporting her in every important decision. Together, they would turn today's painful event into an opportunity to educate, to spread understanding and compassion to everyone, including people like Blake Anderson and Richard Mason. That evening, the golden sunset bathed the Carter Mansion's garden, marking the beginning of a new journey. A journey for justice and dignity for all, with a heart full of forgiveness and a fierce determination. That day, the sky over New York was clearer and brighter than usual, but the atmosphere inside Exclusive Motors' showroom felt entirely different. There was an undercurrent of unease and tension. Blake Anderson tried to maintain his composure, deliberately engaging in loud, humorous conversations with other employees, as if to prove that the incident with Jessica the day before meant nothing. However, deep down, Blake also felt a strange unease that even he couldn't quite explain. Meanwhile, from his office behind the glass, Richard Mason sat silently, observing his employees through the clear pane. A stack of sales reports and brand images lay on his desk, but he couldn't focus on them. An unfamiliar sense of discomfort lingered in his mind, a vague feeling that yesterday's incident wasn't just about an unhappy customer leaving, but a sign of something far more serious about to unfold. At that moment, unexpectedly, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom worth over $1 million slowly approached the driveway leading to Exclusive Motors. The car, like a luxurious work of art, exuded an unmatched aristocratic aura, making every employee in the showroom stop what they were doing and turn their eyes toward the vehicle with surprise and curiosity. Blake immediately hurried to the large glass door, trying to get a clearer view of the car and its occupant. In that moment, he felt a strange sense of anxiety rise in his chest. With years of experience in the luxury car sales industry, Blake knew that customers driving a Rolls-Royce Phantom were ultra-wealthy individuals, people who could decide the fate of the dealership with nothing more than a simple nod or shake of the head. The Rolls-Royce stopped directly in front of the door. The car door opened gently, and Nathaniel Carter stepped out with a powerful, confident presence. He wore a finely tailored black suit, meticulously crafted with every stitch. His face resolute, and his deep, unwavering eyes commanded respect from anyone who looked at him. The showroom air seemed to freeze as Nathaniel gently closed the car door and walked toward the entrance with strong, assured steps. Blake stood frozen in place, his eyes wide in shock. In that instant, he immediately recognized the man walking into the showroom, Nathaniel Carter, the top tech billionaire in the United States. Blake could hardly believe his eyes. A man of such power was walking into the very store where Blake had publicly insulted his wife just the day before. Richard Mason, still in his office, quickly rushed out, his eyes widening in panic as he realized who had just entered. He adjusted his tie hurriedly, trying to regain his composure, but the anxiety on his face was unmistakable. Nathaniel entered the showroom, and immediately all sounds stopped. Every step he took echoed clearly in the otherwise silent space. He paused in the center of the showroom, scanning the room before locking eyes directly with Blake, who was still standing there stunned. Nathaniel spoke first, his deep voice filled with authority, resonating through the showroom. "I'm here to clarify a few things that happened yesterday. Who among you is Blake Anderson?" Blake flinched, startled, but quickly regained his familiar fake calm. He stepped forward, attempting a polite smile despite the tension still evident in his posture. "Mr. Carter, I am Blake Anderson. How may I assist you?" Nathaniel stared into Blake's eyes for a long moment, his expression devoid of any emotion except seriousness and authority, which caused Blake to unconsciously tremble. Finally, Nathaniel spoke gently but coldly, emphasizing each word. "Yesterday, my wife, Jessica Carter, came here to inquire about purchasing the limited edition Azure Coupe, and you publicly insulted her in front of many people. I want a clear explanation from you about this." Nathaniel's words hit Blake like a lightning strike, draining the color from his face. Richard Mason, standing nearby, also instinctively flinched, realizing that he was facing consequences far more severe than anything he had imagined. Richard quickly interjected, trying to smooth things over. "Mr. Carter, I'm sure this is just a small misunderstanding. Blake didn't mean—" Nathaniel raised his hand slightly, immediately cutting Richard off with an unequivocal tone. "I don't think this is a small misunderstanding. What I witnessed was a clear case of racial discrimination and prejudice. Exclusive Motors has long been known as a prestigious place, but if the values of this dealership do not align with basic respect and fairness, I will not hesitate to use my influence to publicly expose the truth about this place." The atmosphere in the showroom grew heavier than ever. Blake stood frozen in place, feeling for the first time in his life that all of his confidence and arrogance had evaporated. In that moment, he realized he had made a grave, irreversible mistake. A mistake that no one, not even Richard Mason, could defend him from anymore. Nathaniel looked around the showroom one last time and spoke decisively. "I want to meet with both you and the owner, Richard Mason, right now. We need to have a serious conversation." With a strong motion of his hand, Nathaniel pointed toward Richard's office. Blake and Richard were compelled to follow him, both filled with anxiety and fear. Nathaniel entered the office, closing the door behind him, the moment signaling clearly that a direct confrontation was about to take place, and it would serve as a harsh lesson about the value of human dignity, something Nathaniel Carter would enforce firmly. As the office door of Richard Mason closed, a thick tension immediately enveloped the room. Nathaniel stood at the center, his resolute gaze sweeping over the people present. Blake Anderson lowered his head, avoiding that sharp look, his hands clenched unconsciously, his breath quickening. Richard Mason stood nearby, his face pale, clearly unfamiliar with the kind of tense, awkward situation he was now facing. The silence dragged on for a few suffocating seconds before Nathaniel spoke in a deep, clear voice that carried authority. "I'm not here today to make a scene or seek personal revenge, but I cannot remain silent in the face of the blatant discrimination my wife had to endure here at this dealership yesterday." Richard jumped, his eyes filled with concern as he glanced at Blake. His voice trembled slightly as he tried to de-escalate the situation. "Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize if your wife encountered any inconvenience here. This was surely an unfortunate misunderstanding." But Nathaniel cut him off decisively. "Misunderstanding? I think you should listen carefully to what I'm about to say before you decide whether this was a misunderstanding." Nathaniel took a step toward the office door, opening it wide toward the showroom, where employees and some customers had gathered, curious to see what was happening. Standing tall, his voice resonated clearly, enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. "Yesterday, a woman entered this showroom with the intention of purchasing the limited edition Azure Coupe as a special gift for her sister. But simply because of her modest appearance and the color of her skin, that woman was publicly and blatantly insulted by the sales manager here, Blake Anderson." Everyone in the showroom immediately went silent, whispers fading into nothing, the air becoming more oppressive than ever. Blake felt every eye scrutinizing him, judging him. His heart raced as if it would leap out of his chest. For the first time in his life, Blake truly felt panicked, unable to control the situation. Nathaniel continued, his voice still calm but clearly filled with justified anger. "That woman was none other than Jessica Carter, my wife, and the founder of the Carter Foundation, a charity that has devoted her life to helping thousands of disabled children in New York and across the United States." Whispers began again, louder this time, filled with shock and disbelief. No one had imagined that the simple woman who had entered the store the day before was such a remarkable and respected figure. A few employees turned to look at Blake with eyes filled with disappointment and anger, as if witnessing a deep betrayal of fundamental ethical values. Richard Mason's face turned pale, and he stumbled back a step, seemingly realizing the true seriousness of the situation. He stammered, attempting to explain again, but his voice was weak, lacking the strength to persuade anyone. "Mr. Carter, I had no idea about Mrs. Carter's true background. This is truly something we never intended to happen." Nathaniel turned his head to look directly into Richard's eyes, this time his voice softening but still firm. "Richard, the biggest issue here is not whether you or Blake knew about my wife's background. The issue is how you treated a person based on her appearance and prejudices. A prestigious dealership like Exclusive Motors allowing such blatant discrimination. I'm truly disappointed." Blake, by this point, could barely stand. He was frozen, his mind spinning as he realized the grave consequences of the arrogant and indifferent actions he had once considered normal. He lowered his head even further, unable to utter a single word, even in weak defense. Nathaniel turned directly toward Blake, his voice once again stern, like a public condemnation. "Blake Anderson, I want you to understand that your actions didn't just hurt my wife personally, they insulted everyone who has ever been discriminated against by such baseless prejudice. Do you think a person's value is determined by their appearance or the color of their skin? I want you to answer that right here in front of everyone. Blake lifted his eyes to look at Nathaniel, his lips trembling, his face pale with despair. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. In that moment, Blake realized there was no way out. The truth had been fully exposed, and he couldn't deny it or offer any more justifications. The entire showroom was eerily silent, waiting for some response from Blake, but he could only lower his head, trembling, fully aware that his career and reputation were quickly crumbling before his eyes. Nathaniel's words were not only the truth laid bare, but also a heavy judgment against the arrogance and prejudice Blake had harbored for so long. Nathaniel turned back to speak firmly, closing this moment of truth. I hope that everyone in this showroom understands clearly that a person's true value has never depended on their skin color, appearance, or the money in their bank account. Exclusive Motors now needs to seriously reconsider its policies if you want to continue operating with the reputation it once had. With that, Nathaniel turned and walked out of the showroom, leaving behind stunned faces, lowered gazes filled with shame and confusion, and Blake Anderson, the man who had lost everything because of his blind discrimination. The atmosphere in the Exclusive Motors showroom became suffocating, almost impossible to breathe. Nathaniel had just left the store, but the echoes of his stern words still resonated with power, causing everyone present to fall silent, lost in deep thought. Blake Anderson stood like a statue in the center of the room, his face pale, his eyes vacant as he stared into the emptiness before him. Everything he had built, his career, reputation, and personal pride, seemed to have shattered before his eyes, leaving an empty coldness that gripped him. Richard Mason still stood nearby, his mind spinning with worries as countless fearful thoughts flooded his mind. He knew that a scandal like this could completely destroy the reputation of Exclusive Motors, which had once been a symbol of luxury and class. He tried to think of something to calm the situation, but it seemed like it was already too late. Amid the tense silence, unexpectedly, a young but clear and strong voice rang out from the back of the room. "I have something to say." Everyone immediately turned to look in the direction of the voice. It was Daniel Harris, the youngest salesperson at the store, known for his quiet and shy nature. Daniel took a step forward, his hands clenched tightly in nervousness, but his eyes were filled with determination and resolve. His youthful face turned slightly red, but his courage was undeniable. Blake instinctively looked up at Daniel, his palm suddenly cold as he noticed the serious and unusually determined look from his young colleague. Blake knew well that Daniel had witnessed the entire event the day before, but he never imagined that this shy young man would have the courage to speak up now. Richard Mason frowned slightly, worried as the situation continued to escalate. He raised his hand, trying to calm things down. "Daniel, this is not the time." But Daniel had made up his mind. He didn't wait any longer, speaking louder and more decisively. "No, this is exactly the right time. I need to speak up because I saw everything. I can't stay silent any longer." Daniel's gaze was fixed directly on Blake, no longer with any hesitation. Blake immediately realized that his worst fear had come true. A direct, credible witness was now standing up against him. Daniel continued, his voice filled with emotion but clear and firm. "Yesterday, I personally witnessed Blake Anderson publicly insult and discriminate against Mrs. Jessica Carter simply because of her skin color and appearance. Not only that, But Blake also lied to Mrs. Carter, telling her that the Azure Coupe was only for VIP customers, but immediately after she left, he introduced the same car to a wealthy white couple. Daniel's words struck like sharp knives, fully exposing Blake's weak justifications. Every sentence from the young man seemed to nail the final judgment against Blake Anderson, leaving no doubt about the true nature of the incident. The showroom atmosphere instantly became even more tense. Some employees lowered their heads in silence, while others looked at Daniel with admiration and surprise. This was the first time they had seen Daniel so strong, standing up to defend the truth, despite his usual tendency to avoid conflict. Blake felt a true sense of panic rising within him. He tried to mumble a few words to defend himself, but his voice shook, lacking any convincing power. "Daniel, you misunderstood. It was just a small incident. I didn't." Daniel cut Blake off decisively, for the first time in his life feeling the strength in his own voice. "No, Blake, I didn't misunderstand. I know exactly what I saw, and I also know exactly why you did it. You think you have the right to judge a person's value based solely on their appearance and personal biases. This wasn't an incident, it was a deliberate act of discrimination." Daniel's powerful conclusion left the showroom in absolute silence. Richard Mason lowered his head, helplessly realizing that he had made a huge mistake by covering up Blake's wrongdoing. But now, even he couldn't say anything to defend his manager. Blake stood frozen, completely stunned, unable to speak any further. Daniel had completely defeated him with the undeniable truth and his brave attitude. In that moment, Blake realized there was no longer any way to hide or cover up. The truth had been laid bare for all to see. Daniel turned to Richard, speaking seriously. "Mr. Mason, I think Exclusive Motors needs to seriously reconsider how we treat customers and how we choose management staff. I can't continue working in a place where such discriminatory actions are tolerated." Daniel's words were a powerful wake-up call to everyone in the showroom. His courage marked a turning point, clearly drawing the line between right and wrong in a way that could not be denied. Blake Anderson stood still, fully realizing that he had just lost everything, from his reputation, career, to the trust of those around him. And the person responsible for all of this was none other than Daniel Harris, a young employee who seemed harmless but turned out to be the quiet hero Blake had never anticipated. The atmosphere in the Exclusive Motors showroom became so thick with tension that it felt almost suffocating. Nathaniel had just left the store, but the echo of his stern words still hung heavily in the air, causing everyone present to remain still in deep thought. Blake Anderson stood frozen in the center of the room, his face pale, his eyes lifeless as he stared blankly ahead. Everything he had built, his career, reputation, and personal pride, seemed to have shattered before him, leaving a cold emptiness. Richard Mason remained standing nearby, his mind spinning as a flood of anxious thoughts overwhelmed him. He understood that a scandal like this could completely destroy the reputation of Exclusive Motors, once a symbol of luxury and class. He tried to think of something to calm the situation, but it seemed like it was already too late. Amidst the tense silence, unexpectedly, a young but clear and strong voice rang out from the back of the room. "I have something to say." Everyone turned to look in the direction of the voice. It was Daniel Harris, the youngest salesperson in the store, who was usually known for his quiet and shy demeanor. Daniel took a step forward, his hands clenched tightly with nervousness, but his eyes were filled with determination and resolve. His youthful face turned slightly red, but his courage was undeniable. Blake instinctively looked up at Daniel, his palms growing cold as he noticed the serious and unusually determined gaze from his young colleague. Blake knew full well that Daniel had witnessed the entire event the day before, but he never imagined that this shy young man would have the courage to speak up now. Richard Mason frowned slightly, feeling a bit worried as the situation continued to escalate. He raised his hand, trying to calm things down. "Daniel, this is not the time." But Daniel had made up his mind. He didn't wait any longer, speaking louder and more decisively. "No, this is exactly the right time. I need to speak up because I saw everything. I can't stay silent any longer." Daniel's gaze was now fixed directly on Blake, with no hesitation left. Blake immediately realized that his worst fear had come true. A direct, credible witness was now standing up against him. Daniel continued, his voice filled with emotion but clear and firm. "Yesterday, I personally witnessed Blake Anderson publicly insult and discriminate against Mrs. Jessica Carter simply because of her skin color and appearance. Not only that, but Blake also lied to Mrs. Carter, telling her that the Azure Coupe was only for VIP customers, but immediately after she left, he introduced the same car to a wealthy white couple." Daniel's words struck like sharp knives, completely exposing Blake's weak justifications. Each sentence from the young man seemed to seal the final judgment against Blake Anderson, leaving no doubt about the true nature of the incident. The showroom became even more tense. Some employees lowered their heads in silence, while others looked at Daniel with admiration and surprise. This was the first time they had seen Daniel so strong, standing up to defend the truth, even though he had always avoided conflict in the past. Blake felt an overwhelming sense of panic rise within him. He tried to mumble a few words to defend himself, but his voice trembled, lacking any convincing power. "Daniel, you misunderstood. It was just a small incident. I didn't." Daniel cut Blake off decisively, for the first time in his life feeling the strength in his own voice. "No, Blake, I didn't misunderstand. I know exactly what I saw, and I also know exactly why you did it. You think you have the right to judge a person's value based solely on their appearance and personal biases. This wasn't an incident, it was a deliberate act of discrimination." Daniel's powerful conclusion left the showroom in absolute silence. Richard Mason lowered his head, helplessly realizing that he had made a huge mistake by covering up Blake's wrongdoing. But now, even he couldn't say anything to defend his manager. Blake stood frozen, completely stunned, unable to speak any further. Daniel had completely defeated him with the undeniable truth and his brave attitude. In that moment, Blake realized there was no longer any way to hide or cover up. The truth had been laid bare for all to see. Daniel turned to Richard, speaking seriously. "Mr. Mason, I think Exclusive Motors needs to seriously reconsider how we treat customers and how we choose management staff. I can't continue working in a place where such discriminatory actions are tolerated." Daniel's words were a powerful wake-up call to everyone in the showroom. His courage marked a turning point, clearly drawing the line between right and wrong in a way that could not be denied. Blake Anderson stood still, fully realizing that he had just lost everything, from his reputation, career, to the trust of those around him. And the person responsible for all of this was none other than Daniel Harris, a young employee who seemed harmless but turned out to be the quiet hero Blake had never anticipated. The first few days at the Carter Foundation were perhaps the longest days of Blake Anderson's life. As he stepped onto the grounds of the charity located just outside the city center, he couldn't help but feel the tension and discomfort rising within him. From a high-ranking manager used to the glow of success, he now stood before the simple gates of a completely unfamiliar place, one he had never cared for, and even avoided in the past. Jessica Carter personally greeted Blake on his first day, her eyes showing no trace of anger or resentment. Instead, she welcomed him with a gentle, sincere smile, as if the previous insults had never happened. It was her forgiving and kind attitude that left Blake feeling even more confused and ashamed. She showed him around the center, introducing the foundation's work, but Blake could hardly focus on what she was saying. His mind was consumed with a sense of unfamiliarity, discomfort, and anxiety. Blake's first task was to assist the volunteers caring for disabled children at the rehabilitation center. Used to dealing with wealthy clients and million-dollar negotiations, he now found himself face-to-face with children in entirely different circumstances. Children who couldn't walk, eat, or even communicate normally. Blake's first day was incredibly difficult. He fumbled awkwardly while trying to help a little girl in a wheelchair, clumsily guiding the children during lunch. His discomfort grew, but Blake couldn't give up. Every time he felt like quitting, Jessica's unwavering gaze would appear, reminding him that this wasn't just a mandatory task but his final opportunity to find some value left within himself. The following days didn't get any easier. Blake continued to make mistakes, and his impatience and detached attitude only made it harder to connect with the children. One time, while attempting to help a boy named Lucas, who had cerebral palsy, stand up, the boy fell to the floor. Blake froze, unsure of what to do. But Jessica quickly appeared, calmly lifting Lucas up and speaking to Blake in a gentle but serious tone. "Blake, these children don't need pity or forced efforts. What they need is sincerity, patience, and true compassion from you. I know this is a big challenge, but I believe you can do it." Jessica's words made Blake feel a deep sense of shame for the first time in his life. He realized that he was unconsciously repeating the same attitude he had shown toward Jessica and other clients at Exclusive Motors, the attitude of contempt and a lack of empathy. But this time, he was more aware than ever of the consequences of such an attitude when he looked into the innocent but sorrowful eyes of the children around him. In the following days, Blake began to truly try. He learned to communicate more gently, with more patience, and little by little, his awkwardness and discomfort turned into warmth and sincerity. Blake started to get to know each child, remembering their names and unique circumstances. He realized that each child had their own story, a remarkable resilience that he, despite being much healthier and wealthier, had never understood. Especially Lucas, the boy Blake had once made fall, grew closer to him. Lucas couldn't speak much, but every time Blake looked into his innocent, trusting eyes, he felt his heart stir. One afternoon, while helping Lucas practice standing again, the boy tightly grasped Blake's hand, struggling to speak each word slowly. "Thank you, Uncle Blake." In that moment, Blake's heart felt like it would burst. He realized that tears were threatening to spill for the first time in many years after living behind a cold and proud facade. It was that simple, innocent phrase that made him truly realize the deep shame he felt for his previous attitude, the prejudice, discrimination, and lack of respect he had once considered normal in his life. From that day on, Blake changed completely. He no longer dragged himself to the center but began arriving early, working harder, and putting all his energy into the volunteer work. No one recognized the cold, arrogant Blake Anderson anymore. Instead, they saw a man who was calm, attentive, willing to listen, and more empathetic. Jessica watched Blake's transformation with a special kind of emotion. She had never expected him to change so quickly, but she also knew that the path to inner transformation was never easy. She quietly supported him, encouraging him with trust and kindness, so he could continue this journey in the most sincere way. In Blake's heart, the initial sense of shame slowly turned into deep gratitude. He silently thanked Jessica, Nathaniel, and Daniel, those who never gave up on him, those who had resolutely given him the valuable opportunity to make things right. But more than anything, Blake knew that the ones who truly saved him were the children at the Carter Foundation, with their pure hearts and extraordinary strength. Blake Anderson's true transformation might have just begun, but he was certain of one thing: the path ahead would no longer be lonely or cold, because now he fully understood that the true value of each person starts with sincerity and deep compassion. After the long days of experience and profound transformation at the Carter Foundation, Blake Anderson was no longer the cold, arrogant man he once was. Now, every time he stood before the children, he felt an unusual warmth radiating from his heart, something he never believed he could feel before. Blake realized that the greatest lesson he had learned wasn't punishment or reproach from others, but the forgiveness, understanding, and compassion that had gradually healed his heart. On a weekend evening, Carter Foundation held its annual charity event at a luxurious hotel in the heart of Manhattan, attended by many philanthropists, influential figures, and the media. The event space was elegantly decorated, soft yet sophisticated, reflecting the simple but refined style of Jessica Carter. Blake arrived early to assist with the preparations. He no longer wore the flashy suits from his past. Instead, he dressed simply and elegantly, fitting his role as a volunteer. But the biggest difference now was the sincere look in his eyes and his genuine smile, something that his former colleagues at Exclusive Motors might struggle to recognize. As Blake was carefully adjusting the details on the banquet tables, Jessica entered. She moved gracefully into the hall, attracting all eyes with her natural beauty and grace, even though she wore a simple light blue dress, her hair neatly styled. Blake looked up and instinctively stopped his actions, his heart beating slightly faster as he saw Jessica approach him. Jessica smiled gently and walked toward Blake with a warm look in her eyes, devoid of any reproach or distance. "Hello, Blake. I'm so glad you're here today. The work you've done lately has truly impressed me." Blake felt a bit awkward but quickly regained his composure, responding with sincere words. "Hello, Mrs. Carter. Jessica. Honestly, I'm the one who should thank you. What I've experienced at the Carter Foundation has truly changed my life." Jessica looked deeply into Blake's eyes, sensing the genuine and profound change within him. She gently placed her hand on his shoulder in a friendly gesture, speaking softly. "I know that the time you've spent here hasn't been easy, but I'm really happy that you chose to stay and have made a real effort to understand the most important things in life. I believe that we all deserve another chance, as long as we are sincere enough to embrace it." Blake lowered his head, overwhelmed with emotion. He took a deep breath and then looked up, his eyes filled with regret and deep gratitude. "Jessica, I want to sincerely apologize once again for what I did before. I was foolish, arrogant, and full of prejudice. You, Nathaniel, and the children at the Carter Foundation have helped me understand that a person's value is never judged by their appearance or status. I don't know if I can ever make up for my mistakes, but I am truly grateful to you for giving me this precious opportunity." Jessica smiled gently, shaking her head slightly, her eyes filled with understanding and compassion. "Blake, the most important thing is that you've recognized your mistakes and are doing everything you can to be a better person. To me, that is what truly matters. I completely forgive you, and I hope that you will also forgive yourself." Jessica's words were like a refreshing breeze, sweeping away the last remaining burdens in Blake's heart. He felt a peace spreading from deep within his heart, a feeling he had never experienced before. At that moment, Nathaniel Carter approached from a distance, having overheard Blake's heartfelt words. He gave Blake a light pat on the shoulder in encouragement. his voice warm and full of confidence. "Blake, I'm so happy to witness the real change in you over the past period. I think you're ready to return to your previous work, but this time with a completely new heart and mindset." Blake looked up at Nathaniel, surprised and deeply moved. "Mr. Carter, do you really think so? I never thought I could return after everything that has happened." Nathaniel nodded with certainty, speaking clearly. "I believe in sincere change, Blake. And to prove my trust, I'm offering you a real opportunity. A large car contract from Exclusive Motors to serve the fleet of Carter Tech Group. I hope that this time, you'll use sincerity and compassion to serve the customers in the right way." Blake felt a lump in his throat, his eyes slightly red with emotion. He understood that Nathaniel was under no obligation to do this, but he had chosen to trust him again. A rare opportunity that not everyone could receive. "Mr. Carter, I promise you and Jessica that I will never disappoint you again. I will use this opportunity to prove that I have truly changed." Jessica and Nathaniel both smiled, their faces reflecting trust and joy. In that moment, Blake understood more than ever the true power of forgiveness and compassion, a power strong enough to completely transform a person, helping them find their rightful path in life. That evening, at the Carter Foundation event, warm laughter and heartfelt conversations filled the air. And among all of this, Blake Anderson finally felt that he had truly rediscovered the real value of life. Not through the glamorous things on the outside, but from the sincerity, gratitude, and deep humanity he had learned to embrace. After the memorable evening at the Carter Foundation event, Blake Anderson's life and perception of the world around him completely shifted. The large contract that Nathaniel Carter offered to Exclusive Motors not only saved Blake's career, but also helped him better understand the responsibility he had to shoulder moving forward. For Blake, this wasn't just a business deal. It was a precious opportunity to fully correct the mistakes he had made in the past. The very next day, Blake took the initiative to meet with Richard Mason privately, openly sharing with him the deep experiences and changes he had undergone. Blake did not hesitate to suggest that Exclusive Motors should become the first luxury car dealership in New York to publicly commit to fighting all forms of racial discrimination and prejudice against customers. Initially, Richard was hesitant, but after witnessing Blake's strong determination and the clear consequences from the previous scandal, he eventually agreed immediately. Under Blake's leadership, Exclusive Motors began holding training sessions on racial sensitivity, inviting renowned experts to educate the entire staff. Not stopping at theory, Blake also personally led each training session, sharing his own real-life experiences at the Carter Foundation, where he had learned the true value of compassion and respect. His genuine emotional stories deeply touched the hearts of every employee, helping them to profoundly change their own perceptions. Blake gradually became the face of this movement at the dealership. He was no longer the cold, distant manager he once was, but someone who was now ready to listen, understand, and support anyone who walked into the showroom, regardless of their skin color, gender, or appearance. Customers quickly noticed this significant change, and Exclusive Motors not only regained its reputation, but also became a symbol of a business culture built on equality and respect. At the same time, Richard Mason could not deny the courage and integrity of Daniel Harris, who had played a crucial role in exposing the dealership's mistakes. Richard decided to promote Daniel, placing him in the important position of overseeing equality and fairness policies. Daniel quickly proved his capabilities in the new role, with initiatives that ensured Exclusive Motors remained a place where all customers were treated sincerely and fairly. Meanwhile, Blake and Daniel became a special duo, frequently collaborating to establish a new company culture at the dealership. From two individuals who once had underlying conflicts, they now became close friends and teammates, working together to spread positive values to all employees and customers. As for Jessica and Nathaniel Carter, they continued to dedicate all their efforts to their mission of compassion at the Carter Foundation. The scandal that had occurred at Exclusive Motors inadvertently helped them realize something important. Racism and prejudice still existed around them, even in places they thought were immune to it. Therefore, Jessica and Nathaniel became even more determined to expand community education programs, hosting forums and charity events to send a strong message that the value of each person was never based on their skin color or appearance, but on compassion and mutual respect. Thanks to their growing influence and reputation, Jessica was invited to speak at major conferences, inspiring thousands with her message about building a fair and compassionate society. Nathaniel, with his financial resources and reputation in the tech industry, strongly supported his wife's social projects, committing to bring lasting change to the community. Whenever Jessica looked back on what had happened, she smiled gently, with no bitterness in her heart. She understood that although the situation had caused her deep pain at first, it was forgiveness and compassion that brought about real value. Not just for her, but for many others. People like Blake, Daniel, and all the employees at Exclusive Motors. As for Blake, every day he woke up with a heart full of gratitude. He never forgot how big his mistakes had been, but more importantly, he had been given the opportunity to correct them and become a better person. He often returned to the Carter Foundation, no longer out of obligation but with a sincere heart, truly wanting to contribute. The children he once helped had become an endless source of inspiration for Blake's life. One beautiful afternoon, Jessica and Nathaniel coincidentally ran into Blake and Daniel at a community event. The four of them stood together, chatting happily and reminiscing about the past. In their eyes, there was no longer any distance or hesitation, only sincere respect and a beautiful friendship built from understanding and compassion. Nathaniel looked toward Blake, smiling sincerely, and said softly but meaningfully, "Blake, I'm very proud of you. We've all learned that sometimes the greatest changes come from the hardest things. You've done really well." Blake smiled, his heart light and at peace. "I'm the one who should thank you, Nathaniel. You and Jessica taught me the most important lesson of my life." Jessica gently added, her voice full of affection, "Actually, we've all learned something from each other. The most important thing is never to lose faith in people, even though sometimes that can be very difficult." And in that moment, all four of them realized that they had just completed a beautiful journey. A journey that not only brought change to themselves, but also spread a powerful message that the true value of each person comes from compassion, understanding, and the ability to forgive one another. It was the most meaningful ending that any of them could have hoped for. Life always brings us priceless lessons, and the story of Jessica, Nathaniel, Blake, and Daniel once again reminds us that the true value of every person is not found in appearances, skin color, or status, but in the heart of compassion and the ability to understand and forgive one another. Have you ever witnessed or experienced situations where you were misjudged because of your appearance or skin color? Please share your story in the comments to help spread meaningful messages of compassion and respect. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow more inspiring and touching stories. Thank you for being with us, and see you in the next stories.